Dwight Eisenhower would have opposed Donald Trump's kill the poor budget plan. So why won't today's Republicans? Let's ask tonight's politics panel. With me for tonight's politics panel are Sam Sachs, writer and co-founder of the District Sentinel News, and Horace Cooper, attorney and senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research. Thank you both for being here with us tonight. Great having you. So even as it slashes away at Medicaid, food stamps, and health care for children, Donald Trump's budget plan calls for a $52 billion increase in defense spending and a $1.6 billion allocation for his completely unnecessary border wall. It is exactly what Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us about in his 1953 Cross of Iron speech.
Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete pavement. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
So, Horace, you're a Republican. Wasn't Eisenhower right? This kind of a budget is theft?
Well, Eisenhower apparently was mistaken in that it's the federal government's job to do all of those things. Now he's right. The federal government does do hospitals. The federal government does do education. The federal government does all of these kinds of things.
Building hospitals in the 1950s pretty aggressively.
And the federal government shouldn't have been, and it shouldn't continue to do that today. That's the real lesson, is that America stepped into the wrong direction after the Roosevelt years and the Johnson years, and they really need to return to the Calvin Coolidge and the kinds of mindsets that represented what our founders would have wanted.
Stuff that set us up for the Great Depression.
This is what we've seen is Eisenhower's worst nightmare come true. I mean, even when he was giving that speech, I don't think he would have anticipated just how much money people are making today, the war profiteers, thanks to all the money that's going to the Defense Department. There's a 10% budget increase that's proposed in the Trump budget for the Pentagon. That's enormous considering how much the Pentagon's budget already is, how big it is. And as crazy as we might say Trump is for proposing this, John McCain spoke out against the budget today, saying it doesn't increase defense spending enough. So there's demands on Capitol Hill for even more spending. And when we talk about the Trump budget overall and whether or not it's going to be received well on Capitol Hill, you know, it's common, I guess, conventional wisdom in D.C. to say, oh, the president's budget's dead on arrival in Congress. Congress is in charge of budgeting after all, and for the last 8 years, President Obama's budget's been dead on arrival. But here, you've got a Republican Congress that's going to be considering this budget, and even if McCain has a problem with the defense spending or Lindsey Graham has a problem with the State Department cuts, you're going to find a lot of agreement when it comes to just dismantling the working class, the middle class, and just eating the poor in this country.
So John McCain is actually on the payroll of the warmongers or the war profiteers.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yes.
His entire career, his sacrifice, his willingness to
He's one of the most hawkish members of Congress. He's one of the hawkish U.S. senator.
Not because he's paid, but because he believes
Horace,
in it.
Regardless of how it's come to it, he's a big champion of the military-industrial complex.
Whether he's a champion or not, it's not the same thing as saying he's a profiteer.
I was in Costa Rica a couple weeks ago, and the cab driver that Louise and I had, I said, you know, what do you think of life here in Costa Rica? How do you like driving a cab? And he said, you know, we don't have a military here. And so I have free health care, my children have free health care, and my children are going to college for free because we decided to put those needs above a military.
And then he added, thank you, America, because since we don't have our own military, America has to do that for us.
Well,
thank you, America.
I don't think
We
so,
don't have
actually.
to not have a military, and Horace is right. Part of the job of the government is to provide for defense, provide for national security.
Jefferson wanted there to be no standing military unless we were in the middle of a
That's
war.
true. It does not call for the government to ensure an empire all around the world in hundreds of military bases and troops stationed in almost every country. That is the problem. That is what costs so money. We can have a strong conventional military and afford to do single-payer health care, afford to make education right.
Let's just be clear here. One of the things that is important for us with our military presence is that we have the conflict someplace other than our own land. Now, for you guys who want to bring it all back in and let's wait until the conflict comes to our shores, you're actually putting American lives at risk.
I have to move along to the next topic, but I would say that the conflict, during Vietnam we said the war always comes home. The war comes home. We're going to be spending trillions of dollars dealing with wounded American veterans, with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. This is a horror show.
And I don't think anybody
that's
feels
an argument
safe in regard to terrorism
That's an
hitting us
argument
ever
for
since we
letting
started bombing the entire
technology.
Middle East.
That's an argument for letting
it's an argument for not letting
take
George
over
W.
the
Bush lie
opportunities
us into another
of
stupid
Americans' lives.
Donald Trump's campaign promise to stop an Indianapolis company carrier from sending thousands of jobs to Mexico looks more and more like a scam every day. The deal he reached with Carrier back in December to keep some of its jobs in the U.S. still allowed 500 of those jobs to be outsourced south of the border, and it now appears that even more jobs will go to Mexico. On Monday, Carrier announced that it will send 600 Indianapolis-based jobs to Mexico before the end of this year. So much for populism. Is it just me, or does Trump only keep the promises he makes to billionaires?
Look,
What promises did he make to billionaires?
It's all about Trump, optics for Trump. This deal with Carrier was never going to be a good deal. I'm sure he knew that this wasn't going to be permanent when he was boasting that he saved 1,100 jobs, even though he only saved about 800 jobs. And now of those 800 jobs, 600 are going to go away. I've never seen an administration so willing, and sure, presidents promise jobs all the time. That's what they do. They campaign on that. But this administration, in the face of such certainty that jobs won't be coming back, when it comes to coal miners and saying, I'm going to bring back coal miners jobs, that's not happening. We've moved past that. Or when it comes to Carrier and the offshoring base because of our manufacturing base has been completely destroyed, saying, oh, I'm going to bring those back. Not with those policies. You're just messing with people's minds, people who have jobs and desperately need to care for their families. Trump is lying to them every single day.
Okay. One, I don't know who the billionaires are that he lied to, but two, to respond here, to hear that he promised to. Yes. I don't know who those people are. But it doesn't matter. What does matter is that the actual union boss there at Carrier was interviewed about this, and he disputes your narrative. It is not of the saved 800, 600 more of those jobs. What he is still upset about is that the 1,100 number was an inflated number, and that we're now seeing that that 1,100 number wasn't accurate. It is not the case that the 800 jobs that were
the biggest part of the
gone.
scam, Horace, and I'm assuming that you'll condemn this because you don't like government subsidies. But the biggest part of the scam was that, the only reason that Carrier agreed to keep those jobs in Indiana was because Mike Pence, who was governor of Indiana, reached into the Indiana Development Fund and handed Carrier tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars.
$7 million.
$7 million. So that's a hell of a lot of money per job.
I would have preferred a system where governments operate like Texas does, with very limited regulation and taxation, and it's an attractive place for people to operate. What Indiana did is the same thing that New York does and Virginia does and many other jurisdictions, and that is they have these high oppressive taxation and regulations, and then some favored people are able to get a break on those. And yes, you're right. I don't think that's the way the system ought to operate.
Corporations in the U.S. pay some of the lowest tax rates compared to the rest of the world. The fundamental problem which you identified is we now have a situation where companies can hold states hostage, and states have to give gifts and bribes for companies just to stay. People who are looking for the profit, they don't care about the community, they don't care about their workers, they want to go wherever the dollar is. So now we have bribes and That's not the power balance. There should change. States, companies should operate at the benefit of the people.
Agreed.
In a free society,
very
people
quickly, a
leave.
third topic here. A group of scientists are accusing the Department of Interior of censoring a news release about a flooding study they conducted because it linked climate change and sea level rise. Draft version of the news release said that global climate change drives sea level rise and increases the frequency of coastal flooding. After reading the draft, Interior Department officials demanded the scientists edit that line. Scientists complied, but told the Washington Post that the blatant attempt to suppress climate science was scandalous. How much damage is being done to the future of our planet and our children by Trump kowtowing to the policies that are being promoted by these petro-billionaires?
Enormous amount of damage. You hear these strange stories coming out of the administration, like some departments only have to have Fox News on all the time. You know, when we had the inauguration and Trump was leaning on to get the photos out there. When it comes to climate change and people not being allowed to say climate change, not being allowed to include words in government reports, that's a whole nother level. I mean, we talking about Trump's vanity. This is the fate of humanity right here. And it does incredible damage.
Johnny come lately on all of these complaints. Okay, when President Bush was in office, there was complaints about what happened at NASA. President Obama said, in my administration, we won't do this. And in fact, he named a science advisor that was supposed to allow people to make sure that science was driving. And they set up directives and recommendations in 2010. It wasn't until December of 2016 that the Department of Energy and EPA got these directives.
So your response is to criticize Obama.
To sit
Okay,
here
we
and
have to wrap
say
it up.
you're worried about Mr.
Horace
Trump
Cooper,
when there was no
Sam
complaints.
Sachs, thank you both for being with us.